As I stand before you today, there are children throughout the world suffering in silence and putting their lives in danger as child laborers in order just to survive another day. Every minute, a child laborer somewhere in the world is facing a work-related accident, illness, or trauma. I wish you could hear them speak to you today rather than me, but they face many fears and many challenges. Fears of losing their sole source of income that allows them to survive just another day. They work simply because they have no choice and see no opportunity but to work whatever job they can find so that they and their families can survive one more day. Hazardous work, as one of the worst forms of child labor, is a very serious concern. ILO ratifies conventions. For those who don't know what conventions are, they're treaties. They're simple agreements among countries that we agree not to do certain things. And the ILO is part of the UN, and we come together and agree upon treaties and resolutions with governments. And there's a treaty dealing with the worst forms of child labor. As you're here today, you'll hear about one convention called 182, which addresses the worst forms of child labor. And in that convention, it refers to hazardous work as any work that harms the health, the safety, or the morals of children. There are an estimated 215 million child laborers in the world today. More than half of those, 115 million, are involved in hazardous work. The route to hazardous child labor is linked to poverty. Let us make no distinction. Poverty forces children into labor. No parent wants to see their young child forced to work, let alone place their child at risk in hazardous work. We know that when parents have access to decent and productive work themselves, which allows them to support themselves and their loved ones, then their children have opportunities to seek education, which is a path to a better future. And I know many of you here today see the path and the links between education and a brighter future. Child laborers may earn just a few pesos, but it cannot change their lives the way that access to education can change their lives for the better. Education opens the door, providing greater opportunity. Many children trapped simply do not know of such opportunities when it comes to education. They don't know that it even exists. In the end, it's not just the children and their families that suffer in terms of child labor. It's our own barangays, the countries of the Philippines, and everyone throughout the world suffers due to the inability of these individuals, these children, to grow and develop and reach their full productive potential. In 2002, the ILO launched World Day Against Child Labor to draw attention to the global extent of child labor. Every year on the 12th of June, the world brings together representatives from governments, employers, organizations, trade unions, civil society, and millions of children and adults throughout the world to shine a light on the plight of child laborers and speak on their behalf. Results from surveys in the Philippines show that children working in agriculture are 5 times more likely to suffer serious injury than children in any other industry in the country. Child laborers in agriculture often carry heavy loads under the scorching sun and heat. Their hands are pricked with thorns, and worse, they are injured by sharp objects and equipment. Many of these equipments weigh more than they do, and they have never received the training on how to operate this equipment, basically doing jobs that they are not trained or basically adequate to do. In addition, they handle chemicals and pesticides that can stunt their growth and significantly reduce their mental development. Children in fishing also carry heavy loads. They dive to extreme depth to chase fish into nets. They can use poisons such as cyanide to extract fish from reefs, which is harmful to their health, but also the environment. Without protective gear and training, they suffer from what's called decompression sickness or illness. They face body burns, hearing impairments, damage to their eyes, cuts, bruises, but more seriously, even lifelong paralysis, being paralyzed. A series of small studies in the Philippines, on the other hand, observed that children scavengers' learning ability declines with the amount of time working on the garbage sites themselves. They are at risk of infection from exposure to toxic chemicals and waste. Children that are domestic workers suffer from different forms of risk, including abuse, long working hours, and living away from their families and loved ones, which again influences their developmental ability. With children in construction carrying heavy loads, and they also work in many cases at dizzying heights, risking injury from dangerous machinery. Again, some of these machineries are larger than the children themselves. They lack the training and the skills to operate. They simply never were designed to be operated by children. Mining and quarrying are forms of work dangerous to children in every way. Children using poisonous chemicals, facing the risk of mine collapse, and sometimes working with explosives. They work in dark tunnels, handle loads weighing more than they do themselves, and some sit for hours under the sun, pounding boulders, working in dirty water to simply extract gold from sand. Each of us must ensure that no child is allowed to be placed in these situations. Let's not deprive children of their rights and hopes for a better future. On this World Day Against Child Labor, we all need to speak out for children, to keep the children in school and out of child labor. Today is a great opportunity to learn more about child labor here in this room and beside this room. To take action wherever you are, whether it be within your school, your workplace, your community, and more importantly, to reach out to child laborers themselves. The ILO and its member states, which include the Philippines, has set the goal to end the worst forms of child labor by the year 2016, only a short 5 years away. It is time for all of us to do our part to achieve this global goal. And again, we, the international community, are only one partner, but those on the ground, many of the NGOs in this room today, play a very vital role in achieving this global goal. Let me thank each of you and encourage you to reach out today and to listen to the people who are speaking and to participate in the activities. Thank you very much. Magandang umaga.
Thank you, Director Johnson. I see you brought your family also. Child labors. I-acknowledge po natin ang presensya. Nandito po kasama natin ang pamilya po ni Director Johnson, the only French-speaking group in this room. Palakpakan po natin ang pamilya ni Director Johnson. We would also thank you for coming over and joining us in the celebration. Thank you very much. We'd also like to acknowledge the presence of the Rotary Club of San Marcelino, Malate. Palakpakan po natin ang Rotary Club of San Marcelino. Second to the last speaker natin sa araw na ito, gusto po natin ipakilala na the officer in charge of the Office of the Undersecretary for Labor Standards and Social Protection of the Department of Labor and Employment. Please welcome Assistant Secretary Maria Teresa Soriano.
Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Parang gutom na kayo. Anyway, on behalf of the Department of Labor and Employment, binabati ko po ang namumuno dito sa pagtitipon natin.
Ilang minutes na ba? Ilang percent na lang yan?
Gusto nyo pa ng kwento? He believed that education is key for child workers to have a better future. So this story of success is key for child workers to have a better future. No? But we must not stop at the gains that we have made thus far. So, sa ILO ho, meron ho silang estimate that the world's 215 million child laborers, meron hong, doon ho sa 215 million child laborers, 115 million ay involved doon ho sa mapanganib na trabaho. Ito ho ay, ang bilang na ito ay sa Asia and the Pacific. So, while the number of children in hazardous work often used as a variable for the worst forms of child labor, ang maganda hong balita ay kumakonti ho sila. Doon ho, kung titingnan natin yung kabuuan ng mga nabibiktima ho. So, ang maganda ho doon medyo bumababa na siya. Ang ano lang ho is that yung pinaka-main mataas na concentration of hazardous child labor is in agriculture. So ito yung sa ating fishing, forestry, livestock herding, at aquaculture. At meron din po tayo yung mga subsistence and commercial farming. So, yan po yung ating mga nakikitang datos. So, given the theme for today's celebration, children in hazardous work, ang atin yung primary question is that we need to answer is, how can we prevent and eliminate the exposure of children to hazardous work? Paano ho natin mapipigilan na magtrabaho ang mga bata dito ho sa mapanganib na mga trabaho? So, to achieve that, kailangan ho natin maintindihan kung ano yung mga epekto ng hazardous occupational exposures para sa mga bata. We need to determine what kind of approach can the various stakeholders adopt to have an integrated policy response to the issue. There are things that will be discussed habang nandito po tayo by knowledgeable and competent and passionate speakers who are also our foremost advocates against child labor. Meron na ho tayong na-establish na listahan ng hazardous work dito ho sa Department of Labor and Employment. Ito ay yung tinatawag namin Department Order number 4 na in-issue ho namin noong pa ho 1973 at in-amend ho namin given yung ating Republic Act 9231. So we recognize the fact that a policy review is in order. So kailangan ho namin balikan yung aming polisiya at para maakma kung ano po yung nangyayari sa panahon ngayon. So we need to make the issuance more responsive to present conditions. Some emergent sectors of child labor that are being looked at ay ito hong sa agrikultura at saka yung informal waste management sector na marami hong ngayong discussion. Also, for children working in agriculture, the risk being seriously injured is 5 times, 5 beses na mas malaki or mas mahigit kaysa sa child laborer in any industry. So the use of tools in the workplace was the risk factor most responsible for the injury. Another form of hazardous child labor that needs to be reviewed is yung nangangakal na basura. No? Sa garbage. Yun yung medyo